Hey, hello everyone. A very warm hello to everyone who is watching this video. And this time we are going to talk about how to give a speech, or rather how to write a speech. Well, people call this the art of public speaking. Why is it treated as an art? Well, we're going to find out very soon. So maybe it's a good idea for us to start with the unique features of a speech and what makes this genre so special. Well, there are a few things that you need to know, and to begin with, the special thing about a speech is that it's written or is spoken especially for an audience rather than a group of readers. So you see, we are more interested in the people who are listening, and we call them the audience, and not for the readers. Well, people don't really take your script and read your speech in the usual cases. Alright, so what's next? Of course, therefore, that naturally brings us to the ear, the second point. A speech is supposed to be targeted at the ear rather than the eye, so people listen. And so when you speak, when you give a speech, you target at the ear so that people can hear clearly rather than the eye. Now, that is why we have the third point. When we are considering writing a speech, we have to be very careful and to make sure that our speech is listener friendly. By that we know it means that the speech, the wordings, the structure, it can't be too complicated, and it can't be too long, and it cannot be too formal, because it is spoken words, and we are aiming at the ear, and people listen and they may forget very quickly if you are using overcomplicated wording, or if your sentences are extremely long, and people will not feel interested if the language is too formal. And therefore, listener friendly, that's a very, very important point. And last, the unique feature of a speech, it is about the message. The message has to be obvious and focused. As we know, a speech usually lasts for 5 minutes, maybe 7 minutes, 10 minutes at most, 20 minutes maybe. It can't be 4 hours, and so we can't be too ambitious and we can't be too greedy. In other words, you can't possibly include too many messages in a speech. The message of a speech has to be focused, so people listen to you, and when they have finished listening, they will still remember that single focused message. And it has to be obvious, so people can leave the audience remembering what you have said, what you have told them. So here are the 4 unique features of a speech. Now, with this basic understanding, I think we're ready for the next point. That is some tips of writing an effective speech right here. So I'm going to give you a few tips. And the first tip before you start. So it's about before you start writing your speech, thinking about what to write and how to write it, you better ask yourself a few questions. Number 1, what do I want my audience to learn or to do? So that is, in other words, the purpose of the speech. You want your audience, the listeners, to do something or to have learned something after listening to your speech. So you have to make it very clear before you write your speech. Number 2, do they know as much about the topic as I do, or will I be introducing them to some new ideas that they haven't heard of before? Now, usually the audience is expecting to hear something new, to get stimulated by your words. So it's very important to know their background understanding and try to, on top of that, add something to their current understanding, to give them some new ideas, and that is very important. Know your audience. Now, question number 3. Before you start, you better ask yourself what level of detail will be effective for them. So you know if you're giving too little or if you're giving too much. Well, it won't be good for the audience. Just right. You have to control the level of detail because there is always a time limit, and your audience is always of a certain level. You can't go over that or you can't go below it. You have to have a good grasp of the level of detail that you are giving so that your speech can be an effective one. So that is my first tip. Top tip number 2. Let's talk about the introduction. The introduction is very, very important because it gives the first impression to your audience. So how can we make an effective introduction? Now, get their attention. So what you say and how you start is important because it is a critical moment that decides whether you can retain their attention. So when you start, give them something that bang, alright, wow them, alright. So that is you can start with a story, you can start with a question. Just try not to start it in a very boring way. Avoid being boring. Now, another thing that we usually do with an introduction is to build up the background. As I said earlier, it is important to check the background understanding of the audience, and before you move on to your own message, the key focus of the speech, you have to ensure that they have the foundational background knowledge so that they can build up on there and then move on to your arguments and to your messages step by step. And in an introduction, we always want to get to the point. If the purpose of the introduction is to get their attention, get them interested, make sure that you get to the point, straight to the point, bang, and then it's done, and then you move on to the next bit of information. So this is all about the introduction, my second tip. Tip number 3. Make your speech easy to understand. As I said at the beginning, the speech is mainly for the ear. And so people listen and they think, and if possible, they would just take it all in and they understand and they then move on to do something. It's not for the eyes. So it has to be listener friendly. But how? The question is, how can we make our speech listener friendly, easy to understand? Now, first tip, the shorter, the simpler, the better. The shorter your sentences, the easier it is for them to understand. People don't usually get a very good memory, alright? And they may get distracted in the middle of your speech. So it's important to use short and simple sentence. Do not confuse them with run-on, overcomplicated patterns and sentences, and big words and etc. That won't do the job nicely. Use fewer pronouns. Well, in reading, usually if we're confused by a pronoun, we can always trace back to the previous sentence or even the previous paragraph. But in a speech which is mainly for the ear, we can't possibly go back to the previous sentence or the previous paragraph. Excuse me, speaker, can you go back to your first paragraph? I want to know, I get lost in your pronouns. Well, that simply can't be the case. So in order to avoid this situation of getting your audience lost in your pronouns, avoid the pronouns. Alright, try to mark each noun properly so that your audience can follow what you're talking about. The third bullet point here. Use strong transitions. All right. Before you move on from one point A to point B, there has to be a strong transition, which serves like a signpost. Turn left, turn right, or go down, straight down. The transition will help your audience to follow your logical flow, to move on to the next main message. A strong transition is very essential in making your speech easily understandable. Well, we know that your audience may forget your ideas, or they may get lost any time. So, well, do them a favor by repeating certain crucial points. Repetition is important, as you will see later on, and the inclusion of buzzwords is important too. What does it mean by a buzzword? A buzzword is a catchphrase, a word that will stick to the mind of the audience. A buzzword, everything is there, it's easily memorable, and well, people will remember what that word is, and from that word they know the main message of your speech. So include buzzwords. A buzzword can be an image or a word that is relatable to the audience. Alright, so think about that. That needs a lot of design, and that's why we say it's an art. Now the last bullet point here, include summaries in your speech. Well, it serves the same purpose, that is to help your audience understand your speech, follow and remember your key messages. So a transition will help, repetition of keywords will help, buzzwords will help, and summaries do help too. So that is how you make your speech easy to understand. So let's take a very quick look once again, the most important point there. Alright, the length of the sentences matters a lot. The use of pronouns, avoid them. Transition, repetition of keywords, the use of buzzwords, and the inclusion of summaries. Let's move on to the next slide. My other tip, number 4, it's about keeping the audience interested. Well, how? You don't have to tell jokes. It doesn't have to be exciting all the time, but it is essential that you be true. What you are saying to them is true. People like to hear the truth, so be true. That is my tip for all of you speech writers or speech speakers, givers. And be emotional. Stir their heart. Talk to their heart by being emotional. Alright? Arouse them with your words. Make them happy. Make them excited. Make them sad. Make them curious. Make them touched. Be emotional. Be true. Be emotional. Talk to their heart. But at the same time, you need to talk to their head too. Make sense. Be reasonable. Give evidence. Give data to support what you are trying to say and what you're trying to convince them to believe in. Be true, emotional, and be reasonable. Alright? Now, of course, we may be at the stage of writing our script today, but later on, at the end of the day, you will have to give a speech to the audience with your script right here. So when the day comes when you have to deliver your speech, you have to watch your tone. But that may be for another episode later on about delivering your speech. Tip 5. What about the conclusion? Let's talk about the conclusion here. Now, repeating the main ideas is very important, but the thing is, you need to restate your main points without repeating them. Repeat means you say the same thing in the same way, but restate means repeating the ideas in a different way, with a different package wrapping paper, with different wordings. So you're basically saying the same thing, but you are talking about it from another angle, with other wordings, in a different way, with a different imagery, with a different metaphor. So you restate your main points in your conclusion without repeating them. If you simply repeat your main points, your audience may feel repulsive and they feel bored, and they may not take in the words or the message that easily or that effectively. Call to action. Every time you give a speech, you want to make a difference, and you want them to hear what you are saying. You want them to take in your message, and then you want them to put it into practice, to make some changes in their life, and that they can take some concrete action in their life. So that is why, in the end, you make sure that you call them to action, so that they do something about it. Alright. So that's basically my tips for writing an effective speech. And to round this all up, after your preparation, after you have written up your speech, you ask yourself again, is the information clear enough? Have I made myself clear? And where may the audience become bored or lost? And will I stay within the time limit, if there is a time limit, or if there is a word limit? Make sure that everything comes within the limits. Now, after sharing some tips, I'd like to also share with you some very, very useful devices for writing an effective speech. Very useful devices when you write your speech. There are tools that you can make use of. And here are some of my favorite devices. Now, the first one, I call it famous quotes. Make sure you include a quote there in your speech somewhere. Why? Well, because a famous quote from a famous person always brings extra weight or persuasiveness into your speech. And it brings a sense of authority, power to your speech. So when people, hear that quote, say from Martin Luther King Jr., they start to believe in what you say. It makes it easier. It smoothens the way. All right. So, as an example, well, as Martin Luther King once said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Well, because Dr. King said it, people will say, amen. I agree totally that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So you see, it gives a lot of power to what you are trying to convey, deliver, or express. That's my first tip. Do include a famous quote somewhere in your speech. Use this. My second device, my second favorite device, and my third one here, is a strong imagery and a sharp contrast. In an effective speech, for the very talented speakers like Dr. King, or as you see here, Obama, they're very skilled at including strong imageries and sharp contrasts there. Let's take this as an example. This is a line taken from President Obama's inauguration speech. That's what he said. And he said this: while freedom is a gift from God, it must be secured by His people here on earth. Well, we know that freedom is quite an abstract concept. But the art here by Obama is that he's describing freedom as a gift. So immediately with this imagery of a gift, you know that freedom is something very precious, valuable, alright? And it is free, yeah? So that's the first thing, strong imagery. You are using the imagery of a gift to help people understand the abstract concept of freedom. for example. Now, mind you, there is another device here, that is the sharp contrast. The contrast between being a gift from God, that is freedom, and at the same time it must be secured by his people. So Obama is trying to explain the different roles that God and his people are playing. While God freely gives us the gift of freedom, we have the responsibility to secure freedom. So this very sharp contrast, the two different roles, the two different parties, and what they should be doing with the gift of freedom. Alright, so I bring you strong imagery and sharp contrast. The next device. Now here we have a punchline, or if you like a buzzword. Well, I mentioned earlier, and the use of statistics too. This is a Greta Thunberg, very young girl from Sweden, and he's a very persuasive speaker too as a young teenager. And this is a line that I quote from one of her speeches, a very famous one now, and she said, "How dare you?" And she was speaking to a group of adults. And she continued later on, "The world had 420 gigatons of CO2 carbon dioxide left to emit back on January the 1st, 2018. And today, that figure is already down to less than 350 gigatons. So what I'm trying to address here is, now, first of all, the use of this punchline. How dare you? How dare you? Just 3 words, but you already feel the power of those 3 words while Greta Thunberg was speaking, addressing a bunch of adults, leaders. Yeah. So maybe you will forget everything she says in the speech, but that line, "How dare you," just sticks in your mind. Yeah. How dare you do it to the future generations? Now, secondly, the use of statistics. In order to give substance to what you are saying, give it concrete evidence to what you are saying, Greta Thunberg used a lot of numbers and data to explain her point that the whole situation is going down. Alright, the figure is going down from 420 to 350 gigatons of carbon dioxide left to emit back. And she even provided an exact date. Alright, so as to convince the audience that what she is telling is true. So once again, a punchline and the use of statistics will help make your speech more effective. The next tip, and probably my last slide on effective devices in writing a speech. This time I am taking this from Winston Churchill, and I'm talking about rhetorical question and the art of repetition. Well, use this. Ask questions in your speech. Ask the audience good questions to help them think, to help them interact with what you say. So here Churchill is saying, you ask, what is our aim? And I can answer in one word. It is victory. Victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory, however long and hard the road may be. So he asked the question, or he takes the role of the audience and asks the question on behalf of the audience, what is our aim? And then he answers the question himself. And he answers with one word, victory. So by asking a good question like this, a critical, important question like this, you help the audience interact with what you are saying, and then you lead them to the answer that you have prepared for them. And in this case, victory. Victory, 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 victory for several times. And of course, he wanted to win the battle a lot. And he was convincing the audience to believe that they could win. And by the way, this speech came from a very important speech that Churchill gave. And the speech made him a very famous speaker. Alright, so I recommend to you rhetorical question and the use of repetition then. Now, after sharing with you a few very useful, effective devices, I'm going to give you a sample to show how those devices can be incorporated in your speech, in the writing of your speech. And I'm going to give you a sample that shows how an effective speech can be written. Alright, and there you go. A sample here. Let me just read before I explain. So I want to give you, by reading, I'd like to give you a feeling of how persuasive a good speech can sound. Imagine you are in a sports shop and your eyes are drawn to a pair of cool-looking trainers, and you like what you're looking at, but you can hear a voice screaming, "Should you bring the trainers home?" Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Sam Choi from the Green Club. I'm here today to tell you about responsible consumption. So if you look at this introduction, it's a very impressive one, because it starts not with the introduction of his own identity, but rather the speaker starts with a scenario, a very vivid scenario, as if you were there yourself. Why? If you remember, it's very important to get the audience attention at the very start. You grab their attention, you make them listen to you wholeheartedly with the use of a vivid scenario. Imagine you are in this, you look at this and you like it, but you hear the voice, you stimulate the senses, so you help them imagine the scenario with the use of the senses, make it sensational. Alright? And then after creating the scenario, you come back to the speech, the audience, the auditorio, the school hall, whatever, ladies and gentlemen, and then you introduce yourself, your role, your name, your title, and then the aim of the speech, so that your audience is ready for the next paragraph, the next step, and they want to get back to the scenario. Alright, so a very effective one, very powerful one. Now moving on. Here, the speech. Well, being a wise shopper means exercising those little grey cells before you put anything in your shopping basket. These are some critical questions you should be considering. Are these trainers produced by a responsible fair trade company? Are they animal-friendly products? Am I adding to the waste problem by getting stuff I don't need? Well, in other words, wise shoppers only buy the right products. So in this part, you notice that the writer of the speech tried to again stimulate the senses by using color words, gray cells. And if you remember previously, at the beginning, screaming to your ear. So you use those words to stimulate, stir the senses of your listeners. And then the writer of the speech continued with a number of questions, this and that, trying to interact with the audience, asking them questions, making them think seriously about the issue. interact, challenge them, and then of course later on you will bring them the answer, your viewpoint, to help them answer these questions later on. And then after a number of questions, the speaker concludes very briefly with one single line, in other words, trying to give a short summary of the main point here, which is only buy what is right, only buy the right products. A very simple message that the audience can bring home with. Alright, they may forget everything that is said here, but they can still bring home this sentence, that we should only buy the right products. Alright, provide summary, help your audience understand what you're saying. Remember that tip previously? Now moving on. Some of you may be thinking that is merely shopping. What's the big deal? But as shoppers, you have the power to make the world a better place through your choice of products. So what's a good product? It has to be made ethically. That is, it doesn't cause suffering, it doesn't cause damage to humans, animals, and the earth. So in this part you see quite a number of questions again to help interact with the audience, or rather to help your audience interact with what you are saying by you put yourself into their shoes and ask questions just like you are one member of the audience. Alright. And another feature that you can notice here is the use of very short and simple sentences, especially in this part of the speech. If you look at the sentences here, they are consisted of not more than 10 words each. So what's a good product? It has to be made ethically. That is, it doesn't cause suffering, it doesn't cause damage to humans, animals, and the earth. And you can feel the rhythm of your speech. And if you remember at the very beginning, I said that a speech is supposed to target at the ear. So if it gets to your ear, you need to make sure that the music, it sounds right. There is music in your speech, there is rhythm there, so people listen and then enjoy the pace and the pauses and the sounds of your speech. Bum 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 bum. So it creates an effect, and that helps people understand and remember what you are saying. So the rhythm, by using shorter, simpler sentences. Everybody alright? So we now move on to the second last part of this sample. A quite long chunk, but I'll read through it for you. To further drive home the point, I'd like to return to the trainers I talked about earlier. Well, did you know that it takes around 150 steps to create a trainer? And because of this, trainers are among the most labor-intensive items we own. Oh, despite this, the cruel fact is that just 0.4% of their retail cost goes to the laborers, which shows how miserably that they are paid. And worse, many are made to work excruciating hours in sweatshops where work injuries are common. And worse still, some are of a tender age when they should enjoy school, but not tortured with work. Now, let's not forget this also. In the making of trainers, an average of about 50 components that can be very polluting are required, including plastics and other synthetic fabrics. So if you were listening very, very closely, you should notice that I try to store and start here and there to try to create an effect with my sentences. And if you go back to the script here, the speech here, it refers back to the scenario or the image that we started off with at the beginning of the speech. So you find an echo between this part and that beginning. And now the writer is using some other tactics, some other devices to make the speech more impressive. That is by using numbers and statistics. 150 steps there, 0.4% there, 50 components there, to give concrete evidence how polluting the process of manufacturing trainers can be. And there is another tip that I'm sharing with you here. Look at the words in red, and they are very striking, emotive words, very strong words like cruel, miserably, excruciating, tortured. So you try, by using these words, you try to talk to the heart of the audience and try to move them, try to shake them, try to scare them, so that they start to sympathize with those poor laborers. And so they try to think again. Should I buy those trainers? They start to think about the question, should I really have to buy those trainers? So those work. I mean, the emotive words will have an effect if you try. And of course you see contrast, comparison, and the gradual logical flow with these words. Despite this, and worse still, step by step you build up your argument and arrive at your conclusion and bring along your audience with you. Now the conclusion. If we become thoughtful shoppers, we can create a healthier demand for ethically produced products. If we become thoughtful shoppers, we can bring a more decent and dignified life to laborers. If we become thoughtful shoppers, we can have cleaner air, water, and land for our Mother Earth. So, ladies and gentlemen, next time you're about to buy those trainers, be thoughtful. Think twice before reaching for your wallet, because your action counts. Thank you. So you see, in this conclusion, it gets to almost the climax of the speech by the building up of a series of repetition. If we become thoughtful shoppers, we can blah blah blah. So it creates the power and the rhythm and brings the whole thing to a climax, to a peak. And that's the effect that you want to create. And of course the word thoughtful, think, thoughtful, thinking twice, they keep repeating themselves. So you can call it the buzzword of this speech, or the punchline. So even though people may forget 99% of your speech, they still remember that, okay, I need to be thoughtful. I need to be thoughtful shoppers. I need to think twice before I consume, before I buy. So if they can remember the word thoughtful, well, this is a successful speech. You can call this a successful speech. Call to action. Every speech should call for action. People listen to you and they go out of the school hall and they start to live a new life. They do something. They take actions. Say thank you, of course. Say thank you to the audience for their listening. Alright, so I bring you this sample, and I hope it gives you a better idea of how a speech can be written and how it sounds like. It can be very powerful if you make use of the tools and the devices. Now the last slide. in this video, it will be the situation for practice. So here I'm giving you a topic for your writing practice, and so after listening to my sample, you may want to try it out on your own. So here is a topic, a situation for you to write on. Now there you go. You are a chairperson of the school green club, and you're going to give a speech to your fellow schoolmates at the school assembly. And the aim of the speech is to convince the audience to stop using plastic cutlery and switch to more eco-friendly options. In your speech, explain how plastic cutlery damages the environment, and recommend what eco-friendly options are available, and show why our habits need to be changed immediately. So I've highlighted quite a few words there for you to understand the gist of this situation. Now this is the role that you're given. So this is you, and you're the chairperson of the Green Club. And what about your target audience? Your target audience will be a bunch of teenagers, probably, because they are your fellow schoolmates. So you are, in other words, you are not talking to a group of adults. You are not talking to a group of little children. And you are not talking to a group of uneducated people, because they are supposed to be schoolmates. They have a fair understanding of what you are saying. Excuse me. And you need to know that they are of a similar age, teenagers. Now, the key issue here is not about responsible consumption, like in my sample, but rather the use of plastic cutlery. In other words, plastic forks and plastic knives and plastic spoons. So you want them to stop using all the plastic cutlery and switch to more eco-friendly options, alternatives, but more environmentally friendly. So this is the overall purpose of your speech. But if you want to break it down in writing your speech, you have to break it down into 3 parts maybe. Make sure that you try to address these 3 points. And I've highlighted the verbs for you. First, you have to explain this, how the plastic cutlery may damage the environment. You may need to give examples. You may want to quote statistics, give evidence, give weight, make it convincing. And of course, you need to do some research before you know exactly what damages are done to the environment. Now, secondly, you need to recommend the eco-friendly options out there. So if we are not using plastic cutlery, what other options do we have? Well, once again, you need to do some research. Of course, you need some research. So you recommend them. You may even want to talk about the benefits of using them, the special features of each option. Alright? And last, call for action. If you remember, you want them to take action after listening to your speech. So probably you want to show them why their habits need to be changed, and need to be changed immediately. Alright? And so that's basically a topic for you to work on for hands-on practice. Here is a word limit, although there isn't a time limit, so make sure that you have a good control of the ideas and keep all of them within 350 words. Alright, so I hope that this video helps you understand, to have a better understanding of what a speech is like, and how to give a good speech, and to have more confidence in the art of public speaking. It won't be perfect, but there are brilliant examples out there. You have excellent speakers out there like Dr. King, Obama, Greta Thunberg, Churchill, many more, and they have provided us with excellent examples, very high standards. So feel free to go to the internet, do some research, and you will be one day standing on the stage and giving some memorable, remarkable speeches. So all the best. Enjoy writing, enjoy the process, and see you later. See you next time. Have a lovely day. Bye.